horses, and I was using them for logging and like pulling a plow and field work and things like that. And from there, I just learned about farriery, and I kind of just took a chance by signing up for farrier school, and when I went, I ended up loving it.
So now you're an associate farrier at Virginia Tech, that's correct?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good program. Are you enjoying yourself? Because you were like traveling the country and the world for a while, and you finally, are you home?
Yep, no, I love it there.
Okay, good deal. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul Papadatos.
All right, so I'd like to start off by thanking the AFA for giving me this opportunity and to share my experience. I'd also like to thank all of you for attending, and I'd also like to thank the people who have created and maintained certification and the therapy and the endorsements. So my name is Paul Papadatos, and I've been a farrier for 6 years now, almost to the day. I first went to Heartland Horseshoeing School, which gave me a great foundation, and now I work for the Virginia Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine. And so before I get started, is there anyone in this room who thinks that the therapeutic endorsement is unattainable for them? Whether the bookwork is too hard or the presentations or treating disease pathologies? Nice. Well, the fact is, I think that everyone in this room can pass the TE if they wanted to. And I hope after this presentation, they'll have a little more light and confidence with taking this exam. So it's a myth when people say that they aren't good at bookwork. It's just a perception. It's not reality. And I know plenty of people who thought this and then applied themselves and now are doing these really great things in this industry, whether it's with anatomy or biomechanics or writing articles or doing presentations. And these people end up being the best teachers. So this presentation is going to be broken down into two parts. First, a little bit on exam philosophy, and second, the therapeutic endorsement specifically. And so one important note is that all exams are flawed, and they always will be, but it's not a reason not to take them. And the AFA has done a lot for farriery, and they deserve to be supported by having more farriers take these endorsements. So for me, failing exams has been a big part of taking exams. I failed my CF horse once, I failed my journeyman bar shoe once, I failed my journeyman practical 6 times, and I failed my AWCF practical 3 times. And so failing for me has played a really important role. And some people might see failing as a negative thing, but it's not. And the most important thing about failing exams is it's not permanent. You always have to believe that when you're in the thick of it, that it's not permanent. And so why is this important? Why is failing important? Failing is important because it made me a better student, which meant I was more organized, I asked better questions, and I became a better listener. It made me refine my skills. I learned more when I failed than when I passed. And most importantly, the process became more important than the outcome. I no longer cared about passing the exam as much as I cared about learning and gaining skills. I also had some great experiences because of failing. And so if I passed my journeyman the first time, I probably would have thought that I was hot stuff, and that I was a lot better than I actually was. But if it wasn't for me failing the journeyman 6 times, the story kind of is that, after that 6th time, I knew that I had to do something different, and I found out about Dusty Franklin's pre-certification course. So I went there for a week, and then at the end of the week, I took the journeyman exam and passed. And that experience was just so great because I met so many people. I was thrown into this really kind of intoxicating environment where everyone was either teaching or learning or doing both, and I was just really moved by it all. And so I went back again in the fall just to go to practice for the FITS exam, which I was going to take in the spring. Then I went back again in the spring, But because of that environment, I had this crazy idea. I consider myself a chronic bad decision maker, and I quit my business and started traveling around the country because I wanted to learn more. I was just in love with learning. And so if I would have never quit my business and traveled, then I would have never gotten the job that I have today, which I love, very much. And so all of that came from failing. And then I also had this other really great experience after I failed the AW, where Grant Moon was having this little private clinic, or not private, but hands-on clinic in Texas, and he sat down with me for about 45 minutes to an hour going over my shoe board and going over the nuances and forging techniques and kind of the history of things, and it was a really memorable experience for me. As well as last year, I attended a pre-certification clinic with Wayne Priest in Iowa, and again, if I didn't fail the AW, I wouldn't have never met him, and if anyone's ever had time to sit down and talk with him, his mind is just absolutely incredible. So one of the basic concepts of Farrier is it's simple but difficult. So what we're doing is not very complex, but it's extremely difficult. And I think that skills, knowledge, and thought are the three things that you need to be a well-rounded, successful Farrier. And there's other parts like the business side, but right now I'm just talking about the practical aspect of it. And these are the things that I mostly focus on when I'm trying to learn. I ask myself, is this contributing to my skills, my knowledge, my thought? Usually it's a little bit of all of them, but I try to keep my learning focused in that way. And now there's also a myth in Farrier, and the myth is that Farrier does not need much training in order to be a professional. And I feel that this affects us negatively as a whole. And this myth is perpetuated through the lack of training and the horse's ability to compensate. And there are many, 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 many ways that we can debunk this myth, and it's important that we do. So I think the English exams are great. Does anyone know the motto for the WCF? Does anyone know what it is? It's Latin, and I would butcher it if I had to say it, but it means with strength and valor. And valor is courage. I think that that's pretty cool. Like the WCF's history and culture is a really great thing. But I think it's a failure that we use the English testing system in order to attain higher achievement in Farrier through the exam process. We need our own suited to our own culture of shoeing horses. So this diagram up here is Benjamin Bloom's Taxonomy. And I stumbled upon this when I was preparing for the educator's endorsement. And this is a revised version of Bloom's original. They've just kind of tweaked it a little bit. And I found that this was to be one of the predominant paradigms for learning hierarchy. It's tiered so that the lowest is the simplest form of learning, which is be the remember, and going upwards becoming more complex. So the CJF is one of the AFA's greatest contributions to Farrier, but it holds us back. And the reason it holds us back is it only really ends up at the apply stage. That's as far as we have to go to complete that exam, to execute, to implement, and to demonstrate. So the CJF is a prescription exam. You know going into it what you have to do. Chances are you're going to use 3/4 inch wide bar stock. You already know what your fit's going to be. And then same thing with the bar shoe. You know what you're going to have to do, and you just have to basically execute it. The written is a multiple choice test, which can be argued that you don't really have to have a true understanding of the information in order to pass. So this exam does not require us to do much thinking, and that's all right. It's a good fundamental test, but we need to have higher exams with more critical thinking. Because what happens, unfortunately, is the CJF alters our perception in a negative way. It alters our perception by creating a ceiling of being the highest exam in America. And we do have the endorsements, but right now, they do not have the same legitimacy as the CJF. They're often seen as auxiliary. Now, the AW, the FITS, and the therapeutic endorsement end up using all the tiers of this model. And that's important. I mean, it's good. We want to use our brains. We want to be innovative. And the most important part is it exercises our brain in critical thinking. It's not that all people that are on the level of the CJF or lower don't critically think. It's quite the opposite. All good Farrier requires critical thinking. We do this on a daily basis, all of us. But the most important part is that we get evaluated and peer-reviewed in critical thinking in Farrier. And all this is going to do is benefit everybody. And so the therapeutic endorsement peer reviews us in critical thinking. And so now, I think that role models play an important part in this. Role models are important in this because they alter perception in a positive way. They give us something to emulate. In order for us to have progression, we need to have our perception altered in this way. And so the best example that I can give is it's like extreme sports. Like I used to ride BMX when I was a kid, and you know, in the early 90s, if you did a backflip at a contest, you would win. And now there's like 12-year-olds doing backflips off curbs, and it's insane. Like it's just absolutely insane. But how does that happen? It happens because of perception. Their ceilings are a lot higher than what ours once were when we were young. So we need to raise our ceilings in our industry, and part of that is to have good role models. And I think that a good role model is someone who's balanced in knowledge, skill, and thought. And so one of the benefits of taking the TE is that work is more rewarding. I have a better understanding of what I'm doing, and that brings me value. It's easier and less stressful. It's helped me organize my thoughts and explain things in a confident and concise way. I have working definitions for all of these things, so when a client asks me about something, I can answer in a concise way instead of trying to figure out how I'm going to explain something. And then I don't have to go through this long-winded or unsure explanation that may not even answer the original question. And so some of these other things, basic things are self-evident. So like obviously, right, you're gonna have more knowledge because you're gonna be studying and reading about these things and talking about them. Your critical thinking is gonna go up because of that too, because obviously for this exam, you're gonna have to know the whys of things. Your competency is gonna go up as well. You're probably gonna be innovating because your brain's gonna be at that higher level because you're just kind of like tuning it up with all this practice. And then your self-confidence is going to go up. All these things are going to make you feel good, and it's going to boost your morale and, you know, everyone's around you. And so now we're going to talk about how to get to the TE. And the most important thing is having a why. And now this is going to be personal and different for everyone. The why is like your fuel. You need the why to keep going physically and mentally. And I have many whys, and they're important to me. So like before I was a farrier, I started farming, or I was farming, and I was not very successful monetarily. I had to borrow money to go to horseshoeing school from a private lender. I had a $200 car that I called the Warrior that couldn't turn and accelerate at the same time. You either had to do one or the other because the wheel was about to fall off. And I had a winter coat that I found in a Salvation Army dumpster. So, I mean, that's how I showed up to farrier school. And my why was I wanted to get out of poverty. Like I wanted to do good. I didn't want to just schlep around. And so I was repaid for my effort with a livelihood from Farrier, and because of this, I feel very strongly to give back to Farrier. And now I'm working a part of a team. I work with Travis Burns and Dr. Pleasant, and that's really important to me to be able to contribute to this team. I also work for a veterinary teaching hospital, which pays me my salary, and then I'm also a humble servant to the state of Virginia because they give me retirement and all the benefits, health insurance. And so it's not just about me, but how I can contribute to the greater team, and that's my why. And so when you have a why that's greater than yourself, it's easy to stay motivated. And the most important things of your life are the things that you contribute to that are greater than yourself. And so after you have a why, you want to start creating tangible goals. And so you want to break down the exam into digestible bites, and as you complete them, check them off, and you'll feel good about yourself because you've been completing these goals. This is going to motivate you to continue on and to make real progress. So the thing you don't want to do is put one monumental goal in front of your face, like just saying, I want to do the TE. And so like the examples of how you can break this down is like when you have to answer the written, to study practice for the written exam, you want to break down the questions into these smaller pieces and then answer those. Or like with the presentation, just work on parts of it and then put it all together. Or even with the shoes, like working on the elements of the shoes and then putting it all together. You don't want to just say, I just want to do this presentation, or you just think of the written exam as this big thing, but more in these very small incremental pieces. And so this is the biggest secret in Farrier. In order to progress, you need stamina. It's like, how long can you sit in front of an anvil or in front of a book? And so this isn't about like these iconic farriers that are so good at shoe building or so smart or this or that. You think about these Calgary winners, they had to start somewhere. They were all pulling god-awful clips, just like the rest of us at the beginning. We all start at the same starting point. But it's the stamina that brings us to our higher levels. So have you ever met a person who has like this insane talent? I call it phenomenal skill, but they have no drive. It's like a wasted gift. Like these people don't necessarily get far because they don't have any motivation, even though they have this really great talent. But then have you ever met someone who has what I would call phenomenal will and average skill? These are the people that won't ever give up. It's like they end up realizing their full potential. It's something that I like to call their best self. And they, like I said, they have average skill, but their drive is so strong. And so once you have a why and tangible goals, then you need to take massive action. So you need to give it everything that you have. Studying, forging, practicing, and creating the presentations, you have to go all in. And like I said, these things are not complex, but they are difficult and they require a lot of our attention. And lastly, something that I don't think gets talked about enough is choosing a mentor. And I think that this is really important to have a mentor when taking exams like the Therapeutic Endorsement. And so the example that I can give is like in boxing. And I don't really know anything about boxing, but when I sometimes watch it on TV, right, and there's the ringside coach in the corner and the round ends, and the guy goes back to the corner, and obviously he's fatigued and tired, and one guy squirts the water in his mouth, and then there's the ringside coach there that's talking to him. He's giving him advice or, emotional support or whatever else. And I think that that's really important, and we need to have more of that in our industry, because some of the benefits are like, right, you can stand on the shoulder of giants. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Their past experiences can help you, and you can synthesize them with your own knowledge to make your own experiences. And they can help you see things that you can't. They can help you shape and change your perspective. Sometimes you can get tunnel vision and they can help you see differently. And so a big part for me from going from the journeyman to the AW, or going from horseshoeing school to the journeyman to the AW, is that I would fit so tight. Like in school, it was just what we were taught, and it was appropriate because a lot of these horses were in these giant fields, so we fit really tight. And then when the journeyman came, right, like the journeyman is just like a sloppy hunter fit. You know, it's very tight, but not like a dime on a dime. And then when you go to the AW, you have to fit much fuller center of stock, either on, you know, inch wide steel or inch and a quarter steel. And so it was really hard for me just to wrap my brain around all that. But luckily I had some mentors who just, you know, kept kicking me in the butt every time that I was, you know, fitting tight and thinking that I was fitting so full. So they can really help change your perspective in that way. And they can also help you get out of your comfort zone. Like you know, like when you're in the shop and you're building shoes and you're listening to music and like you're having this great time, and you take like every little thing you do is one heat. It's just like one heat, and then someone comes along and like, no man, like you got to do that all in one heat, and you're like, oh crap, like you know that you're supposed to be doing that, but you kind of just like, it feels good and comfortable to be forging like that, right? And the other thing for me is like being timed. Like when I was taking my journeyman and I was at Dusty's and I had those instructors there, all I wanted to do was like make pretty shoes and put them on the feet and just stare at them and be like, wow, Paul, that was friggin' awesome. But it took 4 hours, you know what I mean? It's like, and I remember it was Jeremiah Harris that was kind of working with me, and he's like, no, come on, let's go. And I hated it. I did not like the feeling of being rushed like that. Like, you rushed my art, you know what I mean? It's just like, but it was those people that got me to that level, and once you do it, you know, you realize the value of it. And the other thing is that they can help you keep calm or motivated depending on your personality type. And so like for me, I need to be calmed. Like anyone who knows me, it's like when I'm right before I'm about to do a horse for a contest or the AW, like before I'm even pulling the shoes, I'm sweating. Like I'm sweating. And I'm like, what are you sweating for? You didn't even do anything yet, right? I just get really worked up, and you know, if someone's there that can, you know, I just look over and they're just like calm down. I'm just like, okay, yep. Like they can really provide a lot of support for you. And so to end on this note, if anyone is interested in taking this exam and need a mentor, I will be willing to help anyone in this room. And so now we're going to talk about the TE specifically. So the therapeutic endorsement is like they want you to have knowledge of therapeutic shoeing and disease pathologies. They want you to have a reason for your answers, techniques, and beliefs. You need to have a why. So you can't just say, like for example, if you say, oh, well, I used a wedge pad, and they'll say, well, why? And you say, well, I wanted to take strain off the deep digital flexor tendon. And then they say, well, how does that happen? You have to have answers. You can't just kind of say like sort of like a mimicry of what you've learned. You need to know the basis of why that information is what it is. And so in a lot of cases, there's no right answer. But the most important part is you have to have a rationale for your answer. This is what they're looking for. You might say, you know, to treat a laminitic that you want to use clogs, and everyone on that panel thinks clogs are stupid. But if you have a good rationale for it, they're not going to fail you. And so they also want you to critically think. It's like if you were presented with a new situation, how are you going to deal with it? And what's your rationale for it? And that's the basis of this exam. And also kind of another note, it's like what to wear. You know, I think it's important when you show up to these exams to look professional. You know, we want to kind of up the professionalism in our trade. One of the ways of doing that is, I mean, I wore a tie when I took this exam. I don't necessarily think you have to, but it's not a bad idea to look presentable. And so there's 5 parts to this exam: the shoe display, the written exam, the forging exam, the oral case-based exam, and then the case presentations. And I'll be going over each one of these now. And so this was gotten from the syllabus, but it says the ideal shoe display would show quality forging, fabrication, innovation, and various forms of attachment. So your shoe board should be what you do, not what you think they think that they want you to do, and not what you think they would be happy with, but what you do. This is an exhibition of your farriery. They don't have to be complicated shoes with long-winded explanations. You can have, say, you have a bar shoe in your shoe board. And they say, well, what did you use that for? You say, I wanted to increase heel flotation and soft footing, or I wanted to decrease independent heel movement. That's it. You don't need to have these like shoes with this crazy jewelry or super complicated stuff. And so also you want to make sure that you've used all of these shoes, or at least know enough about them to sound like you have used them, or would know how to correctly apply them if the situation presented itself. And so for my shoe board, I did not apply all the shoes to horses. But some of the shoes that I made, I just wanted to learn about and be able to apply them if the situation was presented. But I asked enough questions to people who to the people who had a good understanding of how and when to correctly apply them. And I know that when I took my AW before I took the Therapeutic Endorsement, and you know, I didn't really have a good understanding of some of the shoes in my shoe board, and that was a bad thing. But luckily I did well on the written, that they didn't ask me too many questions. But when I went to Virginia Tech to visit, to practice for the AW, I mean, Travis had used a lot of the shoes that I had in my shoe board, and he was asking me all these really kind of simple questions, like if you had used them, you would just know, and if you didn't, he was like, oh crap, what would I do in that situation? A good example would be I had an adjustable patent bar, and he said, well, when you reset it, are you going to put that foot down on the ground and let it load, or are you just going to hold it and have someone, you know, clean it off and reburn it on? And I didn't even think of that. I mean, so it's good to ask questions to people if you're going to use, like that have used these shoes, if you're going to pick shoes that you haven't used yet. And so this is my shoe display. I think it'd probably be a good idea, like if you had at least one concave shoe, one aluminum shoe, one plain stamp, one fullered shoe, one welded shoe, at least one fabricated shoe. So this was the shoe board that I handed in, and that top right one, which is a full shoe, it's got some polymethyl methacrylate on the heels to make a wedge that then could be gradually lowered. And that was one that Gerard said that he liked, and that was kind of what he was sort of looking for in these shoe displays, is just in terms of like fabrication and innovation. And so then there's the written exam. And the written exam format is 3 questions with 3 parts, and you have to answer all of them. And so this makes it a little bit different than the AW, and in my opinion, it makes it a little bit more difficult. Because the AW, if I can remember correctly, it's 7 questions, and you get to answer 5, so you get to omit 2. This one, you can't omit any, so you have to know all of the information. You don't need full sentences. You don't have to write a story to answer these questions. If you make bullet points and then just go through it factually, that's going to get you there more efficiently, because there you are under a time limit. These are some of the textbooks that I found to be helpful. Adam's Lameness, the Simon Curtis books, Equine Podiatry, Diagnosis and Management and Lameness in the Horse, and the Principles of Farrier. And so I kind of synthesized, I went through the books and got the information I got, like wanted out of all of those. And then also there's some articles that can be really helpful. Like for example, I can't remember when it was published, maybe a year ago or 6 months to a year ago, Travis Burns wrote an article in the FPD newsletter about white line disease, and it basically answered the entire question. I mean, you could have just got that information out of there and you got one knocked out right there. And there's a lot of other classic articles, like on navicular syndrome and other things, that could really help in answering the question, or giving you the information you need to answer the questions. And so the way that I approached this written test is I went through, so everyone knows that there's a syllabus of this exam on the internet, so you can go through the syllabus, and I can show you real quick here. There's these appendixes, and or the Appendix B in the syllabus is all the different topics that they can talk, that, you know, is kind of fair game. So what I did is that I went through all of those topics and answered, you know, the anatomy, the physiology, the idiopathogenesis, and the Farrier's role for them. So I had written them all out. Physiology is basically biological function. It's just what's the function of that anatomical or multiple anatomical parts. And idiopathogenesis is like what's the cause of it. And so what I did was that, like I said, I answered all of them to the, like, where I thought it was going to be an okay amount of information. And then I transferred it over to an audio recorder that I got an app on my phone. And then I just played it back when I was driving to horse stops or driving to work or whatever else, and it really cemented the information. So it's like practicing for a horse during the practical. Like, you do the same thing over and over again so that during test day, that's what you do. This is the same thing. I just had the answers already down, how I was going to answer them, and then on test day, I just wrote down what I could remember from those sections, and it was kind of like, could do it verbatim at that point because of that audio recorder that just played in my head. So the other part of it too is that you want to develop good study habits, and part of having good study habits is practicing a little bit at a time frequently rather than cramming. And you can also study, like, if you have a helper or someone you work with or a family member, because really a lot of times I think when we have stuff in our head, we think we're more confident about it than when we actually, like, spit it out of our mouth. And then it's like the holy grail question: how in depth? How in depth do we have to answer these questions in order to pass? And I wish I had that answer, and I don't. I've taken this test once. I've never seen anyone else's exams. I don't know where that threshold is of passing and failing. But the advice that I could give is you have to make your own standard. This test is showcasing your Farrier. It's demonstrating your knowledge. So don't study for a bare minimum. It's like dive as deep as you can, because it's interesting stuff anyway, and it benefits you. So just, like, even if you have to kind of pretend, just make it seem interesting. And so these are the topics from the syllabus, right? It says laminitis, ossification of collateral cartilage, degenerative joint disease. Use this verbiage. It's like, use the medical terms or the anatomical terms instead of the layman's terms. It doesn't say up there founder, ring bone, side bone. So it's important to keep with the verbiage of the exam. And so, like I said, I went through all of these and answered those with anatomy, physiology, idiopathogenesis, and Farrier's role. And if anyone wants to go to my website, it's 4 easy payments of $79.99, and you can have a copy of it. Right, and so now for the foraging exam, this is what the syllabus is currently. And So they're going to be probably giving you a principle, and you have to make a shoe to fit the pattern. During my exam, I had to do a wedge shoe, or they said mine was a shoe to change the angle of hoof on hard ground. So I picked the absolute easiest one. I had a good measurement for a graduated shoe, and I made just a plain stamp wedge shoe with a toe clip. It was just simple. You know, I didn't have to do anything fancy. I didn't make a roadster or spavin shoe or something that would require something that was more complex. And so you need a measurement system for the shoes because it's going to fit a pattern. So you need to make sure that you have a measurement. And also, like the first one, it says various bar shoes. So they can still pick a specific shoe. They might just say, hey, make a part bar to this pattern, or make an egg bar to this pattern. And so you don't necessarily need like table shoes. They don't have to be rasped to perfection. They're looking for solid basics and functionality. You want to break down the shoes into the elements and practice the elements. So example would be like lateral extension. Like they might say, hey, can we have, you know, a 1/2 inch width outside the bearing surface a lateral extension. So you're going to have to know how much material you need to put in for that, you know, when you're practicing. So practice the elements rather than just practicing whole shoes, because it usually ends up being more efficient and you'll get more out of the practice. And so now for the oral case-based exam, you're going to be given a disease pathology. So when I took it, they had diagnosed it for me, so I didn't have to diagnose it. They were asking me like what the pathology was specifically and what my treatment plan was for it. They gave me different variables and also asked me like what I would do in the first shoeing. This horse might be in stall, it might be in pasture, it might be in hard ground. You know, what would I do in the second shoeing? This horse changed environments, what would you do? What's the long-term plan for this? You know, they're trying to make this into a discussion, not like an interrogation. When you do the oral case, you really don't want to ramble, and that's really important. Like, you don't need to go on about this, that, or the other thing. You don't really need to try to fill the silence with words, because the excessive rambling can lead to more questions from them, and you can just kind of go down a rabbit hole. They may ask if you're sure, and it may mean nothing more. They might just say, are you sure? And if you are sure, just say yes, and then stop talking. You know, make eye contact and answer the questions directly. You want to show confidence, but not arrogance. And this is something that you really shouldn't be nervous about. It's like if you worked hard for it, you know the knowledge, you can do it. And then finally, the case presentations. So an important part of the case presentations is that you need to tell a story. There needs to be a chronological order that we will go over. My style in the case presentations, as you'll see, because I'm going to show you one of them, is very plain. It's up to you, like, how you want to lay it out, but don't let the actual, like, glitter of the PowerPoint distract from what your message is. And you can also leave out some information because, like, strategically, then they can be turned into questions at the end that you can easily answer. The presentations don't need to be a lecture on the disease pathology that you're treating. It's understood that you and the panel know what the pathology is. So it's not like you need to explain what laminitis is if you're going to be treating a horse with laminitis. They may ask you at the end, but it's not like you're trying to educate them on what laminitis is. It's what you did during that case. And so one of the most important things, this is the most important part of the case presentations, is the organization. So you need the signalment, which is the age, breed, and sex, and then the history, which is basically like, how did that horse get to you? How did that horse come to you for treatment? And then the physical and clinical findings, so it's like what you saw or what the vets saw, or, you know, what was on the x-rays. Then hopefully a diagnosis, which would be by a veterinarian. And then treatment principles, but treatment principles are the treatment goals. It's like, what are you trying to accomplish? And then the treatment is like what you actually did. So the treatment goal would be decrease the tension of the deep digital flexor muscle tendon unit. And then the treatment would be applying a wedge pad. And then the outcome. And having it in this order makes it more organized and more of a story, and it makes it easier for you to complete each section. So you just have to kind of fill it in like that. And another important part of this is the photos. And so you want your focal point of the photo to be the main part of the picture. You don't want the background to drown out what you're trying to portray. So like if you want to take a picture of the bottom of a hoof, either you're going to zoom in, you're going to stand close, or you can crop it like in a photo editing program for just the bottom of the hoof. It doesn't need to be 15 feet away and you can see half the horse's body. Or if you're trying to take like a lateral shot of the foot, and you'll see in my photos how that's demonstrated, but like you don't want to take a lateral of a foot and it be 15 feet away and you can see the whole horse when you're just trying to show maybe the foot and the fetlock or the foot up to the cannon bone. And then also practice in front of people. This is really important. Practice in front of anyone who really has any more knowledge of farriery, whether it be other farriers or veterinarians, because they can like ask you questions about your presentation of things that you like have in your head, but you may not necessarily put in the presentation to kind of complete that story. And then they can also just ask you questions that could help you prepare for the kind of the questioning part of it. So kind of what to expect is, you know, that you're going to be in this room with the panel and you're going to be giving these presentations. You have two of them. So you give the first one and they ask you questions about it, and then you give the second one and then they'll ask you some questions about it. So like I said, part of this whole exam is having a why and a rationale. Excuse me?
How long is that course usually average?
They say that it should be no longer than 15 minutes per case. And so depending on how it goes, you know, you really shouldn't have it more than, it really won't take you more than 15 minutes to usually explain everything.
And that's including questions?
No, that's just the presentation itself. Yeah, so it's about probably 45 minutes for questions and presentation. And I know, like I said again, with the orals, don't be nervous about it. Like, you've done these cases, like you probably know more if you've done all the research than they do, you know, so it's one of those things where you just have to show confidence. And so now we'll be going over one of my case presentations, and we're gonna, I'm a little bit ahead or behind on time, so we'll just go through it rather quickly. I'll just kind of go over the important points. So this case was a septic navicular bursitis case. And so and this is how I would start it, right? I have the signalment, the age, the breed, the sex, and you can see, like I said, this is very plain. There's no color or anything. That doesn't really necessarily matter. It's not going to affect your exam. So on September 22nd, 2017, Cassie, an 8-year-old American quarter horse mare, presented to the Virginia Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine for evaluation of severe left hind lameness. The history indicated that Cassie had stepped on a staple, and which was removed by the owner 4 weeks prior. A few days after the insult, Cassie became lame on the left hind limb, and her local veterinarian was consulted. The veterinarian recommended further examination and diagnostics, but Cassie's owner elected treatment on the farm. So the treatment consisted of antibiotics and foot bandaging. Cassie did well initially, but approximately 4 weeks later became severely lame in the left hind limb again. At this point, Cassie's local veterinarian was out of town, and her owner took her to another local equine practice. The veterinarians at this practice suspected a deep puncture involving bone and/or synovial structure and referred her to the veterinary teaching hospital. So that's my history. That's how it got to us. It's like basically she stepped on a staple, the owner pulled it out, she didn't want to like get any further diagnostics, so they just treated her on the farm. It got better a little bit and it got worse, and then they brought it to us. So that kind of sets the stage as a chronological story. This is the staple that the type of staple is industrial sod staple, and the owner reported that only one of the prongs went in her foot. And so at presentation, so this is now at the hospital, Cassie was moderate to severely lame on the left hind. She was noticeably lame at the walk, and she resisted putting full weight on the limb, and when she was at rest, was always offloading the left hind limb. So evaluation of the solar surface of the left hind limb foot revealed a puncture wound of the lateral sulcus of the frog. So now we're getting into the physical findings. And now you can see how, like I said, how we have a picture, right? And it's just the bottom of the foot. So I can easily portray what I'm trying to depict. So the left hind foot, so now this is sort of getting into the diagnostics, like how are we going to figure out what's wrong with this horse, right? So the left hind foot was cleaned of dirt and debris and trimmed. On close examination of the foot, there was purulent material coming from the lateral frog sulcus, so where she had stepped on the staple. And there was undermined epidermal frog in this area. The undermined epidermal frog was removed with a hoof knife and a scalpel. This photo illustrates, and so the words that you want to use with choosing photos or radiographs, a good word to use is illustrates or depicts, right? So this photo illustrates the foot after removal of the undermined epidermal frog. The foot was scrubbed with betadine and sterile saline in preparation for probing the puncture track. A stainless steel malleable probe was gently placed into the wound tract until it contacted firm tissue. Lateral, medial, and dorsal plantar radiographs were taken to determine the depth and the direction of the puncture. So now we're just trying to figure out where that puncture went, or where the staple went within that foot. The lateral medial radiograph illustrates that a foreign body had likely entered the navicular bursa. This radiograph also illustrates a lytic area on the flexor surface of the navicular bone. So with this radiograph's 2 dimensions, right? So we need to take 2 views in order to see a 3-dimensional image of where that is, because it can be anywhere lateral to medial just from this radiograph. So now we have the dorsal plantar radiograph illustrating the probe approaching the flexor surface of the navicular bone. So with these 2 radiographs combined, indicates that the original puncture wound went through the DDFT into the navicular bursa and traumatized the flexor surface of the navicular bone. So up until this point, really the only part that the farrier had was trimming the foot and cleaning it up. This is all veterinary work right here. So this isn't something that you're going to be doing necessarily, but you want to be talking to the vets so that they can give you the information that you need to accurately tell this story. And so with the radiographs, the history, and the clinical findings indicated septic osteitis of the navicular bone and septic navicular bursitis. And due to the chronicity of this problem and radiographic evidence of bone lysis, the prognosis for this mare's return to soundness was poor. The prognosis to become pasture sound was fair to guarded. The findings and concerns were discussed with the owner. So the owner elected surgical exploration and debridement of the affected areas. After the owner elected surgery, the farrier team formulated a post-surgical shoeing plan. All physical components were fabricated, prepped, and ready for application before the horse was placed under general anesthesia. So now we have our diagnosis. And they may act I told them that, or I state in this, right, that the horse is going to have surgery. And they may ask me at the end, what does surgical debridement do for an infection? How does that help? Things like that. You need to know the whys of why they're doing this, even if you're not, a vet. And so now this is the shoeing plan, the treatment goals, like I was saying, these are the treatment principles. We want to decrease tension from the DDFT, or the deep flexor muscle tendon unit. We want to protect the solar surface of the foot from trauma and contamination. And we want to recruit the frog and sole into load sharing for the contralateral limb. So those are the principles. It's not actually what the treatment is. And so now we're going to talk about the treatment. And so in order to achieve our goals, we created a 4-bolt hospital plate made out of the Sound Horse Series 4-degree wedge plate material. So it's just basically a hospital plate with a wedge built into it. We modified a Sound Horse Series 1 glue-on shoe to accept the hospital plate by drilling and tapping 4 corresponding holes for the bolts. The hospital plate allowed the foot to be protected and treated post-surgery. It prevented contamination and pressure. The wedge relieved tension off the DDF muscle tendon unit. The Series 1 allowed us to safely secure a shoe on the horse while it was under general anesthesia. So basically, we put the wedge on to decrease the tension. We put the hospital plate on so it could protect the bottom of the foot and can be treated. And then we used dental impression material for the other, the contralateral limb, which was secured with a bandage. Then we also made a flat hospital plate and a 3-degree hospital plate out of the Sound Horse material, just in case if the vets decided they wanted to use a different degree of wedge or if they wanted to gradually decrease it at a later date. And so now I'm going to skip this part because we are running out of time, but this is going to be basically the surgery. And I would say that you probably wouldn't need all these pictures and documentation of the surgery. But I just had them because we do have students there that take these photos for documentation, and I thought it was just cool, 1, for me to learn about, but 2, also to explain it and share it with the panel. So basically they were going to go in arthroscopically, and they were taking radiographs to determine exactly where. That's an intraoperative photo of the where they were doing the debridement. And so now they've done all the debridement, and we're going to prep the foot. So we prep it with a hoof buffer, which basically for the polymethyl methacrylate glue to adhere properly, that good foot prep is essential. Then we put electrical tape around the coronary band to avoid getting glue on it. We use 6 pumps of glue from the Equalox 2, and then mixed it with a little bit of black dye to match the color of the hoof. We mixed that vigorously for 1 minute, and then applied the glue to the inner cuff, and then the outer cuff, or the outside layer on both sides. And then we put glue on the outside of the hoof, and then gently but firmly slide the shoe onto the hoof capsule and kind of take out all the folds so that it's nice and smooth. And then we fasten it with plastic wrap and lock it in the heels, and then wrap it around the rest of the foot. And then while that glue was setting up, we mixed the dental impression material with copper sulfate crystals, which would basically be an antimicrobial for that other foot. And then applied it to the contralateral foot, kind of smashed it down because the horse is not weight bearing, so we just wanted to make an impression of it. Smashed it down with the hospital plate, and then we're going to wrap it with vet wrap and duct tape and elasticon. The reason we didn't shoe this, we would normally shoe this before the surgery, but the horse was so lame that it would not bear weight on the affected foot. And so here you can see that this is after that plastic wrap was removed. They packed it with sterile gauze and put the hospital plate on, wrapped it. So now this horse was in the hospital for 4 weeks, I think, and the post-operative management was antibiotics and NSAIDs, regional limb perfusions, and foot cleaning and rebandaging. And about 2 weeks later, we put a Series 1 on the contralateral limb with Equipack when the horse was more comfortable bearing weight. And so she was kept in the hospital for 5 weeks just to monitor post-surgical healing. They put tincture of iodine on the foot every 3 days to keep it sterile, and then for help the bottom of the foot epithelialize. And then 4 weeks later, Cassie came back in to the hospital, and so it's a total of 9 weeks. So you can see how much foot she had. It's like a crazy amount of foot. So this shows the significant amount of hoof growth. There was more length of the toe than the heels. The plantar angle was 0, even though that's a 4-degree wedge. You can see it from the front, same thing. It's a lot of length. That's the staining of the iodine, the black. It's trimmed now, and that's the foot trimmed. And now you can see that we have a 0-degree angle about 2. So with the wedge removed, we gained about 4 degrees with the trim. And then they also took images to evaluate the navicular bone while the shoe was off, and you could see that there's a lucency just off the midline of the navicular bone. And then the skyline or flexor view confirms that lytic area. And so we put a 3-degree wedge pad on this time to kind of start the lowering process. And then the instructions were for her to be in a small turnout. And then Cassie presented 6 weeks later for evaluation to be retrimmed and shod. She showed mild lameness at the walk, and this could be from the possible damage of the flexor surface of the bone and adhesion of the DDFT to the plantar surface of the navicular bone. And so this just illustrates the efficacy of the copper sulfate. That's the foot trimmed. And so the foot was it was contracted. Like the foot on the other one, we put a nail-on shoe on, it was a size 1 SX7. This one was a size odd with a 2-degree wedge pad, and it was still kind of big on the foot. So we trimmed and shot to try to maintain that positive plantar angle again to keep the reduction of the tension on the DDFT. And so this is the lateral view with the 2-degree wedge. We used the 2-degree wedge to continue the graduating process. The discharge was stall rest and hand walking for 2 weeks, and then could return to a small paddock. And if she didn't become more lame, then she could be turned out in a larger field with her friends. And so this is the last time I saw this horse, and I tried to call the owner, and they never got back to me. So I'm not really even sure how, obviously this horse has adhesions, and it's going to be limited to what it can do, but she's actually pretty lucky that it's alive because of how many weeks she went with that infection in the foot. And that was it. So that was my outcome there. It wasn't necessarily completely conclusive, but sometimes it can't be. So I know that was a little bit rushed, but I hope that helped illustrate or give a little bit more light to the presentations. So again, like if you go back and just following that order that I said earlier and just filling in those things, then you should be good. And you want to be like a little kid, like asking why. You want to make sure that everything that you do, you have a reason for. Because when they ask you, then all you got to do is answer it. But if you don't know, then you get balled up, you get nervous, and then you got to think on your toes, and just make it a lot harder for yourself. So that concludes my presentation, and I have just a short. Part of my chronic bad decision making is I bought a bunch of camera equipment instead of buying a house, and I made this small video that I just wanted to share with you guys. I think Farrier has a lot to offer humanity. It is more than attaching metal to the bottom of a horse's hoof. If we look close enough, we can find metaphors hidden inside. Farrier teaches us patience, tenacity, teamwork, communication, courage, hard work. It teaches us that the hard choice is usually the right choice. It doesn't let us take the easy way out. It doesn't sugarcoat the results. It teaches us to find focus in discomfort and distraction, and no gimmick can replace honest effort. A hammer swing can be one of the most beautiful things, but it can't come to fruition without many hours in front of the anvil. The metal shows us whether we are true or not. It shows us whether we can see shapes, spatial proportions, and diversions from symmetry. The whole is made from the sum of its parts, and we as individuals make up the whole of Farrier. It is up to us to keep the progression and passion alive, to maintain integrity. It is our duty, for Farrier has given us friends, meaningful experiences, and a livelihood, which means we owe it our lives. To make a covenant with something or someone means no backing out. It means taking off our shoes at the door. It means to honor our craft. It is the love of Farrier that brings us together. So let us not polarize it, but unite as one. For in the end, we are all in the same trenches. If we put the future generation before us when we gather, then our existence will be guaranteed. So let us today and every day, when we are in the rain and mud, or safe from the elements, under a kicking donkey, or having the best team practice, never lose sight of the meaning this craft has given us. And most importantly, to always give before we take. We have time to answer questions or? Yep.
It's been a long time since I took my TE. Have they upgraded the reading requirements? There are a lot of them are materials from like 1989.
You know, off the top of my head, I cannot remember if there are suggested readings on the syllabus or not. So I can't really answer that question, but I think that really for this exam, like I said, those books that I put down, and then also exploring into the scholarly articles and different articles that Farriers have written will be at least a very good start.
Well, I was just going to say, I gathered up most of those, like vet clinics in North America from '89 is unobtainium. If anybody wants to see it, let me know and I can get them a copy.
Okay, perfect.
It's a practical thing you can do.
Yeah. Any other questions?